Chapter 7 of Cocoa and Chocolate. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. Cocoa and Chocolate, Their History from Plantation to Consumer by Arthur W. Knapp. Chapter 7. Byproducts of the Cocoa and the Chocolate Industry. Cacao butter. In that very able compilation, Allen's Organic Analysis, Mr. Leonard Archbutt states, in Volume 2, page 176, that cacao butter, quote, is obtained in large quantities as a byproduct in the manufacture of chocolate, end quote. This is repeated in the excellent book on oils by C.A. Mitchell, Common Commodities of Commerce series. These statements are, of course, incorrect. We have seen that cacao butter is obtained as a byproduct in the manufacture of cocoa and is consumed in large quantities in the manufacture of chocolate. When, during the war, the use of sugar for chocolate making was restricted and little chocolate was produced, the cacao butter formerly used in this industry was freed for other purposes. Thus, there was plenty of cacao butter available at a time when other fats were scarce. Cacao butter has a pleasant, bland taste resembling cocoa. The cocoa flavor is very persistent, as many experimenters found to their regret in their efforts to produce a tasteless cacao butter which could be used as margarine or for general purposes in cooking. The scarcity of edible fats during the war forced the confectioners to try cacao butter, which in normal times is too expensive for them to use, and as a result a very large amount was employed in making biscuits and confectionery. Cacao butter runs hot from the presses as an amber-colored oil, and after nitration sets to a pale golden yellow, wax-like fat. The butter, which the pharmacist sells, is sometimes white and odorless, having been bleached and deodorized. The butter as produced is always pale yellow in color, with a semi-crystalline or granular fracture, and an agreeable taste and odor resembling cocoa or chocolate. Cacao butter has such remarkable keeping properties, which would appear to depend on the aromatic substances which it contains, that a myth has arisen that it will keep forever. The fable finds many believers, even in scientific circles. Thus, W.H. Johnson, in the Imperial Institute Handbook on Cocoa, states that, quote, when pure it has the peculiar property of not becoming rancid, however long it may be kept, end quote. Whilst this overstates the case, we find that under suitable conditions cacao butter will remain fresh and good for several years. Cacao butter has rather a low melting point, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so that whilst it is a hard, almost brittle, solid at ordinary temperatures, it melts readily when in contact with the human body, blood heat 98 degrees Fahrenheit. This property, together with its remarkable stability, makes it useful for ointments, pomades, suppositories, pessaries, and other pharmaceutical preparations. It also explains why actors have found it convenient for the removal of grease paint. The recognition of the value of cacao butter for cosmetic purposes dates from very early days. Thus, in Colmenero de Ledesma's curious treatise on the nature and quality of chocolate, printed at the Green Dragon, 1685, we read, quote, that they draw from the cacao a great quantity of butter, which they use to make their faces shine, which I have seen practised in the Indies by the Spanish women born there. This evidently was one way of shining in society. Cacao butter has been put to many other uses. Thus it has been employed in the preparation of perfumes, but the great bulk of the cacao butter produced is used up by the chocolate maker. For making chocolate it is ideal, and the demand for it for this purpose is so great that substitutes have been found and offered for sale. Until recently these fats, Coconut, stearin, and others could be ignored by the reputable chocolate makers, as the confection produced by their use was inferior to true chocolate, both in taste and in keeping properties. In recent times the oils and fats of tropical nuts and fruits have been thoroughly investigated in the eager search for new fats, and new substitutes, such as Illipe butter, have been introduced, the properties of which closely resemble those of cacao butter. For the information of chemists we may state that the analytical figures for genuine cacao butter, as obtained in the cocoa factory, are as follow. Analytical figures for cacao butter. Specific gravity at 99 degrees Celsius to water 15.5 degrees Celsius, 0.858 to 0.865. Melting point 32 degrees Celsius to 34 degrees Celsius. Tater, fatty acids, 49 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius. Iodine absorbed, 34% to 38%. Refraction, butyrol, refractometer at 40 degrees Celsius, 45.6 degrees to 46.5 degrees. Saponification value, 192 to 198. Valenta, 94 degrees Celsius to 96 degrees Celsius. Reichert Miesel value, 1.0. Polinsky value, 0.5. Kirschner value, 0.5. Shrewsbury and Knapp value, 14 to 15. Unsaponifiable matter, 0.3% to 0.8%. Mineral matter, 0.02% to 0.05%. Acidity, as oleic acid, 0.6% to 2.0%. Although the trade in cacao butter is considerable, there were, before the war, only 2 countries that could really be considered as exporters of cacao butter. In other words, there were only 2 countries, namely Holland and Germany, pressing out more cacao butter in the production of cocoa than they absorbed in making chocolate. Export of cacao butter. Tons of 1,000 kilograms. Holland, 1911, 4,657. 1912, 5,472. 1913, 7,160 tons. Germany, 1911, 3,611. 1912, 3,581. 1913, 1,960 tons. Total, 1911, 8,268. 1912, 9,053. 1913, 9,120 tons. During the war, America appeared for the first time in her history as an exporter of cacao butter. Hitherto, she was one of the principal importers, as will be seen in the following table. Imports of cacao butter. Tons of 1,000 kilograms. United States, 1912, 1,842. 1913, 1,634 tons. Switzerland, 1912, 1,821. 1913, 1,634 tons. Belgium, 1912, 1,127. 1913, 1,197 tons. Austria-Hungary, 1912, 1,062. 1913, 1,190 tons. Russia, 1912, 955. 1913, 1,197 tons. England, 1912, 495. 1913, 934 tons. The next table shows the imports, expressed in English tons, into the United Kingdom in more recent years. Imports of cacao butter. Year, 1912. Tons, 477. In 1913, 912 tons. 1914, 1,512 tons. 1915, 599 tons. 1916, 962 tons. 1917, 675 tons. The wholesale price of cacao butter has varied in the last 6 years from 1 and 3 per pound to 2 and 11 per pound, and was fixed in 1918 by the food controller at 1 and 6 per pound. Retail price 2 shillings per pound. The control was removed in 1919, and immediately the wholesale price rose to 2 and 8 per pound. Cacao shell. Although I have described cacao butter as a byproduct, the only true byproduct of the combined cocoa and chocolate industry is cacao shell. I explained in the previous chapter how it is separated from the roasted bean. As they come from the husking or winnowing machine, the larger fragments of shell resemble the shell of monkey nuts, ground nuts, or peanuts, except that the cacao shells are thinner, more brittle, and of a richer brown color. The shell has a pleasant odor in which a little true cocoa aroma can be detected. The small pieces of shell look like bran, and if the shell be powdered, the product is wonderfully like cocoa in appearance, though not in taste or smell. As the raw cacao bean contains on the average about 12.5% of shell, it is evident that the world production must be considerable, about 36,000 tons a year. And since it is not legitimately employed in cocoa, the brains of inventors have been busy trying to find a use for it. In some industries, the byproduct has proved on investigation to be of greater value than the principal product. A good instance of this is glycerin as a byproduct in soap manufacture, but no use for the husk or shell of cacao, which gives it any considerable commercial value, has yet been discovered. There are signs, however, that its possible uses are being considered and appreciated. For years small quantities of cacao shell, under the name of miserables, have been used in Ireland and other countries for producing a dilute infusion for drinking. Although this cocoa tea is not unpleasant and has mild stimulating properties, it has never been popular, and even during the war, when it was widely advertised and sold in England under fancy names at fancy prices, it never had a large or enthusiastic body of consumers. In normal times the cocoa manufacturer has no difficulty in disposing of his shell to cattle food makers and others. But during 1915, when the train service was so defective and transport by any other means almost impossible, the manufacturers of cocoa and chocolate were unable to get the shell away from their factories, and had large accumulations of it filling up valuable store space. In these circumstances they attempted to find a use near at hand. It was tried with moderate success as a fuel, and a considerable quantity was burned in a special type of gas producer intended for wood. Cacao shell has a high nitrogenous content, and if burned yields about 67 pounds of potassium carbonate per ton. In the annual report of the experimental farms in Canada, 1898, page 151, and 1899, page 851, accounts are given of the use of cacao shell as manure. The results given are encouraging, and experiments were made at Bournville. At first these were only moderately successful, because the shell is extremely stable and decomposes in the ground very slowly indeed. Then the head gardener tried hastening the decomposition by placing the shell in a heap, soaking with water, and turning several times before use. In this way the shell was converted into a decomposing mass before being applied to the ground, and gave excellent results both as a manure and a lightener of heavy soils. On the continent the small amount of cacao butter which the shell contains is extracted from it by volatile solvents. The shell butter so obtained is very inferior to ordinary cacao butter, and as usually put on the market has an unpleasant taste, and an odor which reminds one faintly of an old tobacco pipe. In this unrefined condition it is obviously unsuitable for edible purposes. Shell contains about 1% of theobromine, dimethylanthine. This is a very valuable chemical substance. See remarks in chapter on food value of cocoa and chocolate. And the extraction of theobromine from shell is already practiced on a large scale and promises to be a profitable industry. Ordinary commercial samples of shell contain from 1.2 to 1.4% of theobromine. Those interested should study the very ingenious process of Messrs. Grousseau and Vinconnier. Many other uses of cacao shell have been made and suggested. Thus it has been used for the production of a good coffee substitute, and also, during the shortage of sawdust, as a packing material. But its most important use at the present time is as cattle food, and its most important abuse as an adulterant of cocoa. The value of cacao shell as cattle food has been known for a long time, and is indicated in the following analysis by Smetham. In the Journal of Lancashire Agricultural Society, 1914. Analysis of cacao shell. Water, 9.30. Fat, 3.83. Mineral matter, 8.20. Albuminoids, 18.81. Fiber, 13.85. Digestible carbohydrates, 46.01. Total, 100%. From these figures, Smetham calculates the food units as 102, so that it is evident that cacao shell occupies a good position when compared with other fodders. Food units. Linseed cake, 133. Oatmeal, 117. Bran, 109. English wheat, 106. Cacao shells, 102. Maize, new crop, 99. Meadow hay, 68. Rice husks, 43. Wheat straw, 41. Mangels, 12. These analytical results have been supported by practical feeding experiments in America and Germany. See full account in Zipper's book, The Manufacture of Chocolate. Professor Fielli in Turin obtained, by giving cacao shell to cows, an increase in both the quantity and quality of the milk. More recent experience seems to indicate that it is unwise to put a very high percentage of cacao shell in the cattle food. In small quantities, in compound feeding cakes, etc. As an appetizer, it has been used for years with good results. Footnote. Further particulars will be found in Cacao Shells as Fodder by A. W. Knapp, Tropical Life, 1916, page 154, and in The Separation and Uses of Cacao Shell, Society of Chemical Industries Journal, 1918, to page 240. End of footnote. The price of shell has shown great variation. The following figures are for the grade of shell which is almost entirely free from cocoa. Cacao shell. Average price per ton. Year 1912. Price 65 shillings. 1913 70 shillings. 1914 70 shillings. 1915 70 shillings. 1916 90 shillings. 1917 128 shillings. 1918 284 shillings. 1919 161 shillings. Price per food unit. July 1915. English oats 3 shillings 1 1/2 pence. January 1919. English oats 3 shillings 8 pence. Cottonseed cake, July 1915, 2 shillings 5 pence. January 1919, 3 shillings 11 pence. Linseed cake, July 1915, 1 shilling 7 pence. January 1919, 3 shillings 5 pence. Brewer's grains, dried, July 1915, 1 shilling 6 1/2 pence. January 1919, 3 shillings 8 1/2 pence. Decardicated cotton cake, July, 1915, 1 shilling, 6 pence. January, 1919, 3 shillings, 3½ pence. Cacao shell, July, 1915, 8 1/4 pence. January, 1919, 1 shilling, 4 1/2 pence. The above table speaks for itself. The figures are from the Journal of the Board of Agriculture. I have added cacao shell for comparison. End of chapter 7.